The radio crackled with static before the voice came through, clipped and uncertain. "Command, this is Viper 2-1. We have eyes on the compound. No movement. Repeat, no movement." The sun hung low over the Afghan highlands, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain where 300 meters below, a team of special operators crouched behind a crumbling stone wall. They had been there for 40 minutes, waiting for extraction that should have arrived 20 minutes ago. The Taliban forces were closing in from 3 directions, and everyone monitoring the frequency knew what silence meant in situations like this. In the operations center at Bagram Airfield, junior officers stared at screens showing thermal signatures converging on a single point. The convoy that was supposed to provide ground support had hit an IED 15 clicks out. The Apache gunships were refueling. The Predator drone overhead had already expended its Hellfire missiles on an earlier target. Someone muttered about contingencies. Someone else checked the time. And then a voice cut through the tension, calm and almost bored. "Bagram Actual, this is Hog 17. I'm 10 mics out with a full combat load. Send me the coordinates." The operations officer, a captain barely 2 years out of the academy, glanced at his supervisor. The major shook his head slightly. Everyone in the room knew who Hog 17 was. Major Kestrel Than, 41 years old, 23 years in service, 4 deployments, 267 combat missions, and according to the whispers that followed her through every ready room and briefing, she was finished. Not officially, not yet, but finished in the way that mattered. She had been passed over for lieutenant colonel twice. Her last efficiency report praised her technical skill but questioned her adaptability to modern integrated warfare. The younger pilots joked that she belonged in a museum with her aircraft. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, the Hog, a plane designed in the 70s to kill Soviet tanks. Slow, ugly, loud. In an age of stealth fighters and precision drones, flying an A-10 was like showing up to a gunfight with a musket. But Kestrel Than kept flying it anyway, and now she was offering herself up for a mission that had already been written off as too hot, too complicated, too close to dusk. The captain keyed his mic. "Hog 17, be advised, enemy forces are danger close. Multiple technicals with heavy weapons. Friendlies are pinned in a 3-story compound north side. We have fast movers on standby." There was a pause, then Kestrel's voice again, flat and certain. "I don't need fast movers. I need coordinates." The major leaned over and switched to a private channel. His voice was low, almost apologetic. "Kestrel, this isn't your fight. Let the F-16s handle it when they arrive." But she was already gone. On the ridgeline 10 miles east, the Warthog appeared like a shadow against the amber sky, its twin engines roaring with a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Kestrel flew low, barely 200 feet above the mountains, her hands steady on the stick. She didn't think about the efficiency reports. She didn't think about the promotions that never came. She thought about the men and women on the ground and the seconds they had left. The Warthog's nose dipped slightly as she adjusted her heading. Through the canopy, the compound came into view, smoke rising, muzzle flashes, small figures moving in coordinated patterns. She had seen this before. She toggled her radio. "Viper 2-1, Hog 17, I'm your close air support. Talk to me." The voice that came back was young and tight with fear. "Hog, we've got 30-plus hostiles, small arms and RPGs converging from the west and south. We're down to our last mags. We need fire now." Kestrel's thumb moved over the trigger. "Coming in hot." The Warthog dropped lower, hugging the contour of the ridgeline. She could see the trucks now, mounted machine guns swiveling toward the compound. Fighters moving in short sprints between cover. Kestrel's eyes tracked the geometry of the battlefield, calculating angles, distances, friendly positions. This was the part they didn't teach in the simulators. This was instinct carved out of years in the cockpit, muscle memory built from missions where a single degree of error meant death. She rolled the aircraft slightly, lining up her cannon. The GAU-8 Avenger, a 30mm rotary cannon built around a plane instead of the other way around. 7 barrels. 65 rounds per second. The sound it made was not an explosion but a roar, a deep guttural BRRRT that shook the air and the ground and everything in between. Kestrel squeezed the trigger. The Warthog shuddered as the cannon spun up, spitting depleted uranium rounds downrange. The first technical disintegrated, the engine block punched through, the cab shredded, the mounted gun spinning into the dirt. The second truck tried to reverse, but Kestrel adjusted her angle and fired again. Metal and glass and flesh became indistinguishable. She pulled up, the Warthog climbing with a grace that belied its ugliness, and banked hard left. Tracers followed her, green streaks cutting through the dusk, but she was already out of their arc. She keyed her mic. Viper 2-1, west side is clear, rolling in on the south. Below, the special operators moved. The team leader, a staff sergeant named Boone, risked a glance over the wall and saw the wreckage. He had heard stories about the Warthog, about pilots who flew low and slow and angry, but this was the first time he had seen it himself. The plane circled like a bird of prey, patient and relentless. Kestrel came in again, this time from the south. The fighters had scattered, trying to use the terrain for cover, but she could see them. Thermal signatures bleeding through her heads-up display. She toggled to her Mavericks, AGM-65s, laser-guided missiles designed for armor, but just as effective against concentrations of infantry. She locked onto a cluster near a stone outcropping and fired. The missile streaked down, impacted, and erased the position in a plume of fire and dust. The shockwave rolled over the compound, shaking loose dirt from the walls. Inside, the operators felt the ground tremble. One of them, a medic named Rao, looked up at the sky and whispered something that might have been a prayer or a thanks. Kestrel didn't hear it. She was already lining up her next pass. The radio chatter picked up. The captain at Bagram was coordinating with the F-16s, but they were still 5 minutes out. 5 minutes was a lifetime. Kestrel's fuel gauge blinked amber. She had maybe 10 minutes of combat time left before she'd have to break off. She made it count. The Warthog came in low again, this time strafing a line of fighters trying to flank from the east. The cannon roared, stitching a path of destruction across the rocks. Bodies fell. Weapons scattered. The survivors broke and ran, and Kestrel let them. She wasn't here to chase. She was here to hold the line, and she did. For 8 more minutes, she circled that compound like a guardian angel made of titanium and fury, firing until her ammunition ran dry, until the Mavericks were gone, until all she had left was her presence. And somehow, that was enough. The Taliban forces retreated, melting back into the hills, unwilling to face the Warthog that refused to leave. The F-16s arrived to an empty battlefield. Inside the operations center, the room was silent. The captain stared at his screen, watching the thermal signatures fade. The major picked up his headset and keyed into Kestrel's frequency. His voice was different now, respectful. Hog 17, Bagram Actual, you're cleared to RTB, good work. Kestrel's reply was brief. Copy, returning to base. She turned the Warthog north, climbing into the darkening sky. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. When Kestrel landed at Bagram 40 minutes later, the flightline was quiet. The ground crew met her with the usual efficiency, chalking the wheels, connecting the auxiliary power. She climbed down from the cockpit, her flight suit dark with sweat, her helmet tucked under one arm. Her face was impassive, giving nothing away. A crew chief named Alvarez approached, clipboard in hand. He was 19, fresh out of tech school, and he had been working on Warthogs for 6 months. He knew the plane inside and out, but had never spoken to Major Than beyond the necessary technical exchanges. Now he hesitated, then spoke. "Ma'am, we heard the radio traffic. That was—" He trailed off, searching for words. Kestrel looked at him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. "That was the mission," she said quietly. "Nothing more." She walked past him toward the operations building. Behind her, Alvarez watched the Warthog sitting on the tarmac, its nose scorched, its fuselage pocked with small arms fire. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Inside the operations center, the debriefing was short. Kestrel answered questions in monotone, confirming ammunition expenditure, flight time, enemy contacts. The major who had hesitated to send her sat across the table, taking notes. When it was over, he cleared his throat. "Major Than, I owe you an apology." Kestrel met his eyes. "You don't owe me anything, sir. You did your job, I did mine." The major nodded slowly, but he looked uncomfortable. Still, what you did out there, that was extraordinary. Kestrel stood. It was necessary. She left the room without waiting for dismissal. In the hallway, she passed two junior pilots, first lieutenants barely old enough to drink. They stopped talking when they saw her, their expressions shifting from casual boredom to something else. One of them nodded. Kestrel returned the nod and kept walking. She didn't need their approval, she never had, but something had changed. She could feel it in the air and the way people looked at her. Word traveled fast on a base like Bagram. By morning, everyone would know. The old lady in the Warthog had saved a team that was supposed to be dead, and she had done it alone. That night, Kestrel sat in her quarters, a small plywood box with a cot and a footlocker. She had a book open in her lap, but she wasn't reading. She was thinking about the first time she had flown an A-10, back at Davis-Monthan in Arizona, 20 years ago. She had been a second lieutenant then, eager and uncertain, trying to prove herself in a world that didn't quite know what to do with her. Her instructor had been a gruff colonel named Hargrove, a man who had flown Warthogs in the First Gulf War. He had looked at her on that first day and said, "This plane doesn't care who you are. It only cares if you can fly it." "Can you?" Kestrel had nodded. And then she had climbed into the cockpit and felt the weight of the machine around her, the brutal simplicity of it. The Warthog was not elegant, it was not fast, but it was honest. It did what it was built to do, and it did it well. Over the years, she had flown other aircraft. She had logged hours in the F-16 in trainers and transports, but she always came back to the Warthog. It fit her. And now, sitting in the quiet of her quarters, she understood why. The Warthog was a plane for people who didn't quit, for people who stayed when everyone else left, for people who flew low and slow and got the job done, no matter what the efficiency reports said. She closed the book and turned off the light. Tomorrow there would be another mission, another briefing, another chance to prove what she already knew, that she was exactly where she belonged. The next morning, Kestrel walked into the briefing room at 0600. The room was already full, a mix of pilots, air controllers, and intelligence officers. She took a seat near the back, as she always did, and waited. The operations officer stood at the front, a major named Castellano, sharp and efficient. He began the brief with the usual rundown: weather conditions, threat assessments, mission objectives. Then he paused and looked directly at Kestrel. "Major Than, I want to start by acknowledging yesterday's performance. You saved lives. The team you supported is alive because of your actions." The room went quiet. A few heads turned. Kestrel kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, sir," Castellano nodded. "I also want to address the elephant in the room. There's been talk, some of it respectful, some of it not. I'm here to tell you that from this point forward, Major Than's record speaks for itself. Anyone who has a problem with that can speak to me directly." He let the words hang in the air. No one spoke. Kestrel felt something tighten in her chest, but she didn't show it. She simply nodded. The brief continued, and she listened, absorbing the details of the day's operations. But part of her mind was elsewhere, replaying Castellano's words. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a medal, but it was acknowledgement. And maybe, after 23 years, that was enough. After the briefing, Kestrel walked to the flight line. The morning was cool, the sky a pale blue stretching endlessly in every direction. Her Warthog sat waiting, its engines cold, its canopy open. She approached slowly, running a hand along the fuselage. The metal was scarred, dented, patched in a dozen places. It was ugly and beautiful at the same time. Alvarez appeared beside her, his clipboard tucked under one arm. "Morning, ma'am. She's ready to go." We patched the holes, topped off the fuel, reloaded the gun. Kestrel looked at him. "Thank you, Alvarez." He hesitated, then spoke again. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Why the Warthog? I mean, you could fly anything. Why this?" Kestrel considered the question. It was one she had been asked before, by commanders, by peers, by herself. She looked up at the plane, at its blunt nose and awkward wings. "Because it doesn't lie," she said finally. "It's exactly what it is. No pretense. No politics, just the mission." Alvarez smiled slightly. "I get that." Kestrel climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit. The seat molded to her body, familiar and worn. She began her pre-flight checks, her hands moving with practiced precision. Outside, Alvarez stepped back and gave her a thumbs up. The engines roared to life, and Kestrel felt the vibration through her bones. She taxied to the runway, received clearance, and pushed the throttles forward. The Warthog accelerated, heavy and determined, and then lifted into the sky. As she climbed, Kestrel looked down at the base shrinking below her. Rows of tents and buildings, runways crisscrossing the desert, helicopters lifting off in formation. It was a machine, all of it, a vast organism dedicated to a single purpose. And she was a small part of it, one pilot in one plane. But yesterday, for a few minutes, she had been everything. She leveled off at 5,000 feet and turned west toward the mountains. The radio crackled with routine traffic, weather updates, fuel checks. She listened with half an ear, her focus on the horizon. Somewhere out there, the team she had saved was probably still processing what had happened. They would go home eventually to families and friends, and they would tell the story. The story of the warthog that came out of nowhere and held the line. And maybe, in the telling, they would remember her call sign. Hog 17, Kestrel Than, the pilot who didn't quit. Over the next 3 weeks, the missions continued. Kestrel flew close air support for ground units, interdiction runs against supply routes, armed reconnaissance over hostile territory. She logged 74 hours in the cockpit, fired her cannon 32 times, expended 18 Mavericks, and brought her plane home every single time. The younger pilots started watching her more closely. In the ready room, they asked questions. How did you get that angle? What's your reaction time on a hot call? How do you stay so calm? Kestrel answered when she could, but she wasn't a teacher. She was a pilot. Still, she noticed the shift. The jokes stopped. The sideways glances disappeared. When she walked into a room, people made space for her, not out of fear, but out of respect. It was a strange feeling after so many years of being tolerated rather than valued. One evening, she found herself sitting in the chow hall with a group of junior officers. A first lieutenant named Park, an F-16 pilot, leaned forward. "Ma'am, I have to ask, why didn't you ever transition to a faster platform? You've got the hours, the experience. You could be flying Vipers or even Raptors." Kestrel took a sip of her coffee. It was bitter and lukewarm. The Warthog does a job that no other plane can do. Someone has to fly it. Park frowned. "But don't you want more? I mean, no offense, but the Hog it's outdated." Kestrel looked at him. Outdated how? It still kills tanks, it still saves lives. Just because something is old doesn't mean it's useless. Park opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. Another pilot, a captain named Singh, spoke up. "She's right. I've seen the gun camera footage from your missions. The Warthog gets in close, does the job, and gets out. No other plane can loiter like that, take damage like that, and still bring the pilot home." Kestrel nodded. "Exactly, it's not about speed or stealth, it's about being there when it matters." The conversation moved on, but Park kept glancing at her as if seeing her for the first time. Later that night, Kestrel walked back to her quarters alone. The base was quiet, the sky overhead thick with stars. She thought about what Singh had said. The Warthog brought the pilot home. That was the truth of it. The plane was built to take punishment, to absorb fire and keep flying. It was a survivor just like her. She had been underestimated her entire career. Too small, too quiet, too old, but she was still here, still flying, still doing the job, and that, she thought, was its own kind of victory. The weeks turned into months. Summer gave way to fall, and the war continued its slow, grinding rhythm. Kestrel flew missions over valleys and deserts, mountains and villages. She became a fixture on the radio net, her call sign instantly recognizable. Ground commanders requested her by name. Other pilots deferred to her judgment. She didn't seek the attention, but it came anyway. One afternoon, she was called into the wing commander's office. Colonel Renner was a career officer, sharp and deliberate, a man who had flown F-15s during the Iraq War and now oversaw all air operations in the region. He stood when she entered and gestured to a chair. "Sit, Major." Kestrel sat. Renner studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. "I've been reviewing your record, 23 years, 279 combat missions, 0 losses, 0 friendly fire incidents. That's exceptional." Kestrel said nothing. Renner continued. "I also know you've been passed over for promotion, twice. I want to know why." Kestrel met his eyes. You'd have to ask the promotion board, sir. Renner leaned back in his chair. I did. They said you lacked strategic vision, that you were too focused on tactical execution, that you weren't a leader. Kestrel's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. With respect, sir, I lead every time I fly. Renner smiled faintly. I agree, which is why I'm putting you in for a silver star. Kestrel blinked. Sir, for the mission 3 weeks ago, the compound rescue, your actions were above and beyond. You saved lives under impossible circumstances. That deserves recognition. Kestrel felt something shift inside her, not pride exactly, something quieter. Thank you, sir, Renner nodded. You're also being reassigned. Effective immediately, you're the new operations officer for the Warthog Squadron. It's a leadership position. You'll be responsible for training, mission planning, and oversight. Congratulations. Kestrel stared at him. Sir, I'm a pilot, I fly. Renner's expression didn't change. And you'll still fly, but you'll also lead. That's an order, Major. Kestrel stood slowly. She saluted. Renner returned it and she left the office. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. She stood on the steps, trying to process what had just happened. Operations officer, leadership. It wasn't the promotion she had wanted, but it was something. And maybe, after all these years, something was enough. She walked to the flight line and stood beside her Warthog. The plane sat silent, waiting. She placed a hand on the fuselage, feeling the cold metal beneath her palm. Looks like we're not done yet, she said quietly. The new role came with new responsibilities. Kestrel found herself spending more time in the operations center, coordinating missions, reviewing flight plans, mentoring younger pilots. It was strange being off the flight line, but she adapted. She always had. The pilots under her command were a mix of veterans and rookies, and she worked with them all. She taught them how to read the battlefield, how to communicate with ground forces, how to stay calm when everything went wrong. She didn't lecture. She demonstrated, and when they flew, she flew with them, leading from the cockpit instead of from behind a desk. One morning, a new pilot arrived. A first lieutenant named A-10, fresh from training, eager and terrified in equal measure. Kestrel met her on the flight line. A-10 saluted sharply. Ma'am, Lieutenant A-10 reporting for duty. Kestrel returned the salute. At ease, you ready to fly? A-10 nodded. Yes, ma'am, I've been preparing for this my whole life. Kestrel smiled faintly. Good. Then let's see what you've got. They flew together that afternoon, a training mission over the mountains. A-10 was competent but nervous, her movements stiff, her radio calls overly formal. Kestrel watched from her own cockpit, offering corrections, adjustments, encouragement. By the end of the flight, A-10 had relaxed, her flying smoother, her confidence growing. When they landed, A-10 climbed out of her plane and walked over to Kestrel. Thank you, ma'am, that was incredible. Kestrel nodded. You did well, keep practicing. The Warthog rewards patience. A-10 hesitated, then spoke again. Ma'am, can I ask you something? How do you stay so calm? I mean, I've heard the stories, the compound rescue, the way you fly. How do you do it? Kestrel considered the question. She thought about the years of training, the missions, the losses, the moments of doubt. I stay calm because I trust the plane, and I trust myself. That's all you can do. A-10 nodded slowly, absorbing the words. I'll remember that. As the weeks passed, Kestrel watched A-10 grow. She watched all of them grow. The squadron became sharper, more cohesive, more confident. And she realized that this, too, was a kind of flying, not in the cockpit, but in the legacy she was building. One day, Castellano approached her in the operations center. Major, I wanted to let you know. The promotion board is meeting again next month. Your name is on the list. Kestrel looked up from her paperwork. I'm not holding my breath, sir. Castellano smiled. Maybe you should, things are different now. He walked away, leaving Kestrel alone with her thoughts. She didn't know if things were different, but she knew she had done her job, and that was enough. The board met in November. Kestrel didn't attend. She was flying a mission over the Helmand province when the results came through. By the time she landed, the news was waiting. She had been promoted to lieutenant colonel. The ceremony was small, held in the operations center with her squadron present. Colonel Renner pinned the new rank on her shoulders while the pilots stood at attention. When it was over, they clapped, and Kestrel felt a strange warmth in her chest. Renner shook her hand. Congratulations, Colonel, you've earned this. Kestrel nodded. Thank you, sir. That evening she sat in her quarters, the new insignia heavy on her shoulders. She thought about the years behind her, the missions flown, the lives saved. She thought about the warthog still sitting on the flight line, still waiting. And she thought about what came next, because there was always a next mission, always another fight, always another reason to fly. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, someone needed help, and when the call came, she would be ready, because she was Kestrel Than, Hog 17, and she didn't quit. The war continued, and so did she. Over the next year, Kestrel flew another 100 missions. She trained another generation of pilots. She saved more lives than she could count. And slowly, quietly, she became a legend. Not the loud, flashy kind, but the kind that mattered. The kind that ground troops whispered about. The kind that pilots aspired to. The kind that said, when everything goes wrong, she'll be there. One winter afternoon, she received a letter. It was from Staff Sergeant Boone, the team leader she had saved during that first mission. He wrote about the night in the compound, about the sound of the Warthog's cannon, about the moment he realized they were going to make it. He wrote about his daughter, born 6 months after he returned home. He named her Kestrel. Major Than sat in the chow hall, reading the letter twice, 3 times. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were not. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket, and then she stood and walked to the flight line. The Warthog was waiting. It always was. She climbed into the cockpit, started the engines, and taxied to the runway. The tower cleared her for takeoff, and she pushed the throttles forward. The plane accelerated, lifted, climbed. And as she rose into the sky, Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Than looked out at the endless blue and knew exactly who she was. A pilot, a leader, a guardian. She was the Warthog, and the Warthog never quit.